Welcome to Yates Makes. In this video I'm going to be sharing with you how to achieve a kind of impressionistic, expressionistic technique or style using the gel plate. Let's get into it. Okay, let's start by having a look at what we're aiming for. So it's this kind of focus on very loose mark making, broken colour, kind of impressionistic, expressionistic vibe. So if this looks of interest to you, you can stay tuned. Now this came from my kind of previous set of experiments where I was looking at similar techniques but focusing more on kind of pop and abstraction. So what are you going to need to get started with something more representational or kind of based in realism? So you're going to want a drawing that is fairly kind of loose and expressive with a range of tones. So I chose an iPad sketch and I've printed it out big, and I think having a larger format gel plate for this is going to help. If you've only got a smaller plate, I mean, just focusing on a detail. So here I am. I've printed my drawing out using, I think this was a laser printer, but it makes no difference. It could be an inkjet, but I've printed it A3 and I've printed multiple copies. As with my previous video, you'll see why that's important or useful for the process later in the video. So what I'm doing here is using an oil pastel. These are Cray Pass oil pastels, pretty cheap, run-of-the-mill oil pastels, and I'm just focusing in on my darkest areas that ultimately I want to be my darkest tones in the image. So I've blocked those in, kept everything quite loose and scribbly, but made sure I've got a decent thick coverage, fairly opaque coverage of oil pastel. And I'm now moving on to my first transfer. This is a resist technique, so my oil pastel is going to resist the wet acrylic. Again, I have other videos on this technique if you're interested, but you'll see now this is very much in real time. Into that wet acrylic, nice thin even layer of, I think this was manganese blue, it's Amsterdam paint I'm using. My transfer drawing that you've just seen me do there, or work into with my black oil pastel, goes down, and I've left this with a very light touch, making sure it's made contact for about 15 or 20 seconds, and you can see that where the paper that I haven't oil pasteled has come into contact with that wet acrylic, it's soaked it up, it's pulled it off, and my oil pastel has resisted the other acrylic and therefore left a transfer of my drawing. So that's my first stage. From this point I return to my transfer copy, and I start by just going over for a second time those areas that I'd already transferred, making sure I'm trying to protect my existing transfer onto the gel plate. So topping up the oil pastel in key areas I think is quite important. So I'm just going back over some key areas here, and once satisfied I'd top them up. You know, I'm focusing on details quite precisely but being quite loose in other areas. I've then switched colour, so I've gone onto a sort of browny coloured oil pastel here, and I'm blocking out more of my image, and I'm kind of looking for areas which I want to be kind of mid-tone, I guess. So if you think about this, what I'm hoping for is that more of my image being blocked out, I'm going to get a larger area transferred, and my two colours are going to overlap, plus these extra areas I'm going to put in are going to appear as the colour I decide for my second layer. If you're confused, don't worry, I think this will make sense once you see how this repeat transfer drawing or transfer copy, as it builds a second layer onto the gel plate, it will make more sense. But just think in terms of mid-tone. I definitely think working from sort of dark to light works better for this process. So there you go. I'm just again working very loose, very squiggly. I want these kind of broken marks, and I'm hoping that these layers successively kind of interfere with each other to give me that kind of impressionistic broken feel. So I've chosen red here. Now red I've chosen because I know where it mixes with the blue, where it overlaps, it's going to add depth to those areas and give me quite a dark colour. But of course I know that I've added more oil pastel to this second transfer layer, so I'm going to get areas that are just pure red. So again, down goes my transfer drawing. Trying quite hard to line it up, but I've not used any registration marks or anything. Again, I think having things slightly offset might increase this kind of fractured impressionistic feel as well. This is the hope, the theory. This was my first experiment, so you know, it's all working kind of with some information, some experience, but essentially working quite blind, really. Being experimental, which is like essential. You know, I bang on about this a lot on this channel, that, you know, if you don't know, try. How else are you going to know? So there you go. Peeled this up and you can see definitely where I've now got red layered over blue. I'm getting some darker colours, and where I've just got red by virtue of those extra marks I'd made, those extra areas I'd worked into. I've got some just pure red on the plate. So you'll see me now moving on to the next stage, and what you see on the screen there is a fresh printout. I mentioned before the importance of having multiple copies of your image to work from, so this is my second kind of photocopy, and I'm using as reference that first stage transfer copy. You can see both the blue and the red layered up on it, and I'm working now very heavily into my image and blocking out a lot of it, making sure again I've worked into those key dark areas, trying to protect in some areas what I've already transferred, in other cases quite deliberately avoiding areas in hope that it will pull some of what I've already transferred and create a very fractured kind of visual language and atmosphere. So there we go. Back to my initial two layers, my blue with my red over it. You know, these layers are dry, really important, can't stress enough, you must let these dry. And I'm going in with I can't tell you what this blue is. I think it's kind of some sort of sky blue colour. Again, it's Amsterdam range of paints. So thin, even layer, working quick. You've got to work with this paint while it's nice and wet. Now I've done, you know, schoolboy error. I'd have washed that roller. The barrel of it was full of water. The water's leaked over the the paint as I'm rolling it out, but it's all right. Again, you know, because this is quite a forgiving technique because it's expressionistic, so I went with it. It's too late anyway, what can you do? So on goes the, well, this is now my third transfer layer, but from my second drawing, remember, just to try and remind you and keep track. Again, timing's about the same, thin layer. I'm not pressing heavily here, I'm just making sure that paper has made good even contact all the way over the gel plate. So what I'm hoping for here is that because I've worked into this drawing a lot more, I'm going to get some blue colour, lots of areas of blue down, but I'm also hoping that it's going to start pulling up some of the image, the initial image as well, to sort of fracture it and break it a little bit. Okay, so you can see there from what was on the gel plate. I mean, you can't see a lot, granted. I didn't flip it over to check. I wanted to just have it as a surprise, but the image was remaining quite intact. The paint seemed quite stable on the gel plate, so I thought I'll push the envelope a bit and I'll try one more layer. So with that second transfer copy, I'm now working in, again, working really loose, blocking out loads and loads of the image. particularly in those key areas of tone and the areas of the what's already transferred that I want to protect, whilst also kind of being quite scribbly in background and kind of less important areas, in hoping that it kind of interrupts what's already on the gel plate. So there you go. The image itself is looking the transfer image is looking quite interesting there. So now I'm going in with a pink. I mentioned before, I think working dark to light is probably the easier way to work. I'm also dropping in a little bit of green. Not the ideal way to work, because this is slowing me down, and you really want that paint to be nice and wet. So thin and even, but very wet. You don't want to hang around and let it dry too much on the plate. So thought I'd patch in a few areas of the pink and green. Grabbing my transfer copy. So this has already been through once, I think, no, twice, I can't remember, I've lost track. And again, drying times, you might have to wait a little longer, because that copy has already been used once or twice, but it worked sort of. Okay, I mean, I've hit a hurdle here. I'm lost. I've no idea. That last layer definitely peeled up a bit more than I was expecting. And of course, the more layers I'm building up, the more I'm obscuring the original image. Obviously, I can still see that's the hat, that's the face, the guitar, the hands. But this might work in my favour. I'm now, having done 4 oil pastel resist layers from 2 different drawings. I'm just going to hand paint. I'm going to splash a bit of paint around and just see what happens. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Planning on putting a bit of green through here as well. I'm guessing some of where this yellow goes, and overlaps some of the more broken transparent layers of green. I'm going to get a limier sort of green anyway. We'll see. I'm going to concentrate the yellows here, then see what else we've got to add. Trying to get this paint to go on quite thick, but it's kind of separating a little on the plate. Maybe this is just quite a thin colour. Some of these colours have more body than others, so I might have to do a couple of layers to get the opacity that I want. But again, some of these broken textures might actually work in my favour anyway. Let's just put a little bit over here as well. Alright, I'll speed things along. So this kind of next hand painting section is pretty self-explanatory. Having made that decision that I'd pushed the kind of transfer part of this process about as far as I could, I was at risk of really losing a lot of what I'd already put down. I thought 4 layers was enough. So I've patched in various colours there, as you've just seen. And now just putting some zinc white down. A nice liberal coat here. This is going to be my pool layer, so I want to make sure it's covered every sort of square millimetre of the plate. Make sure it's made good contact with all of those paint layers that are down while it's nice and wet. Get your paper down. I'm using really heavy paper here. I think using heavier paper when you put in a lot of paint layers is probably wise. Or if you're not going to use a heavy paper, use a really good quality paper, like a Japanese like printmaking paper or something that's not going to rip, basically. Now I left this with some weight on it, some books, for a long time, a good couple of hours. I had other stuff to do, and that's where I got to. And yeah, I mean, mentioned before, I hadn't flipped the plate over because I didn't want to disturb or crack the layers of paint at all, and I wanted to be surprised. So I'm encouraged. Like, I've lost kind of clarity and detail in a couple of areas I want, but I really have achieved, and those close-ups there show just how broken and fractured and layered those colours have become. So yeah, I'm enjoying myself basically, but I did want to get a little more clarity back, particularly into the face, the shadows under the hat as well. So just to finish this off, what I did was get now onto my third printout of the original image, the drawn image, and I'm just very deliberately going back into, again with my black oil pastel, being as precise as I can be, making sure I'm getting those key areas of detail that I want. And it's not much. I'm liking the vast majority of the image. I don't want to mess with it. You can overcook things really easy. So working into some key like tones of the face, and a little bit of shadow and kind of line work on the clothing as well. And I've mixed those initial two colours I used, if you think way back to the first two transfer layers, the manganese blue and the red, and I'm transferring that onto a smaller plate this time because I only need a small detail. And there you go. That I've then, with a brush, painted in a tiny bit more blue, didn't film that, sorry, as a second layer, using some gel medium, flipping that over, the gel medium being transparent. It's not going to affect what I've already transferred, and it's going to allow me to kind of line it up and register it as well. Again, left that to dry for quite a long time, and with some weight on it, a good hour or so, and yeah, it seemed to do the trick. It was that last little kind of touch that, just to my taste, that I wanted. Note here, I'm peeling the plate from the print. Kind of is good advice sometimes where you're a little worried about the stability of your image, or maybe the paper's a little thick and it might crease as well. So there you go. My attempt at a kind of impressionistic, expressionistic kind of style, painterly kind of vibe. Plenty to kind of reflect on for me, hopefully for yourselves too. Hopefully it prompts some creative responses for you guys too. So that's about it from me for this one. Thanks as ever for the support. Comments on the last video that I put out last week that's linked in the description box below has some very related techniques to what's in this video. This is just an extension further with dealing with a different subject matter. Remember all that good stuff. You like, your shares, your subscribing and all of that. And take care of yourselves. I'll look forward to seeing you where I hopefully kind of continue to contribute to this kind of ongoing conversation about gel print and home print making and just enjoying making art. I'll see you soon. Take it easy. Ta-ta.